Welcome to the Living with Narcissists podcast, where the first recommendation is don't. But unfortunately, that's not always possible. So this is your haven for validation, insight, strategies, and resources. So let's get started. Welcome, I'm Carrie, and this is the Living with Narcissists podcast. Today's episode will be about the history of parenting. After spending a lot of time learning about how my childhood influenced the development of my personality and coping skills, I started to think about the upbringing of my parents and my husband's parents. That led me to explore the history of parenting. Accepted for millennia, strict disciplinary methods were considered to be the proper way to raise children. After all, you have to be strong and you have to be tough to survive in a very harsh world. In the Middle Ages, social commentators criticized parents for indulgence towards children rather than for harsh discipline. In the late 1500s and throughout the 1600s, Puritan children were taught that by disobeying their parents, they were forcing God to condemn them to eternal death. Wow, that seems a bit extreme. And the only way to bring salvation to children is through strong discipline, which translates to physical punishment. Research from the Journal of Child and Family Studies states that the Puritans never considered the rights or feelings of children. And if children were disobedient, they were whipped in public and forced to make public confessions at meetings. In 1689, John Locke, the English philosopher and physician, who was commonly referred to as the father of liberalism, published the Essay Concerning Human Understanding and presented the idea that children resemble a blank tablet at birth and that they're not predisposed to sin. Locke encouraged 17th century parents to have children learn about consequences naturally, so that self-control and a desire to be accountable for their own actions is a byproduct of reality and guidance, not harsh discipline. While at the time Locke's parenting guidelines were unpopular, it foreshadows many of the positive discipline methods we see today. Locke was way ahead of his time. By the Victorian era of the 1800s, parents didn't shy away from the word no, and they taught their children the difference between right and wrong, true and false. These parents were very rigid. Parents were encouraged not to spoil their children or to give in to them. It is by withholding or granting things that the ruling influence of the mother's mind is most forcibly felt. Basically, children need to be raised to be strong, hardy adults because life is harsh and difficult. Reading the book Ungovernable, The Victorian Guide to Raising Flawless Children, gave me insight into how my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were raised, and how it impacted how they raised me. Info will be in the show notes for this book, of course. Victorian parents used a variety of punishments on their children, including corporal punishment, which includes whipping, hitting, slapping, punching, kicking, spanking, shaking, and even choking. Some parents used straps, switches, baseball bats, and even their fists. Parents might use corporal punishment for antisocial behavior such as lying or stealing, or for aggression such as hitting another child. This seems a little hypocritical from today's standards, that I am punishing someone with the behavior that they're being punished for. So we're punishing someone for hitting with hitting. that seems incongruent. It doesn't make sense through today's lens. They also might punish children by depriving food, which was considered an acceptable form of punishment. And many naughty Victorian children were sent to their room without dinner. Parents might withhold food that their children enjoyed, as they believed that food that was consumed out of desire rather than hunger was morally damaging. And on that one aspect, there actually turns out to have some insight, because binge eating, excessive eating, is a sign of poor mental health, as we know today. They also believed in solitary confinement as a form of punishment. So they might lock misbehaving children in a room alone, or even in a more restrictive space. And in school, teachers were permitted to hit children, even if they wanted to use another object like a cane for misbehavior, such as being late, insolent, or lying. Other punishments might include wearing a dunce hat for incorrect answers, which is very humiliating, sitting in the corner, or writing repetitive statements on the blackboard, like, for example, "I will not talk in class." The teacher could even reduce your meals, and they could cut your hair off. These were common practices at the time, but today they are considered abusive. The first reported child abuse case in the United States occurred in 1874, which is only 150 years ago. And before that, there were no laws in regard to punishing parents or caretakers for abusive or neglectful behaviors. The case of Mary Ellen Wilson marks the beginning of public concern for the plight of abused and neglected children, which led to the creation of the modern child welfare and foster care system in the United States. Mary Ellen was born to Thomas and Frances Wilson in 1864 in New York City's Hell's Kitchen, to be exact. Sounds nice, doesn't it? It was a dangerous place to live, filled with depravity and chaos, a development of tenements, factories, elevated trains, slaughterhouses, waterfront activities, and railroads. Poor people and immigrants lived there, and crime was rampant. Legend has it that one rookie cop commented to his more seasoned partner, "This place is hell itself." And from the description, I would say he was right. From then on, this area was referred to as Hell's Kitchen. By age 2, Mary Ellen's father died in the Civil War, and her mother found it necessary to board her while she found and maintained a job. Times were tough, so ultimately she was unable to pay her caregiver, who turned the girl over to New York's Department of Charities. A few years later, the 10-year-old orphan was adopted by a Manhattan couple, Thomas and Mary McCormack. But Thomas died soon after the adoption, and his widow Mary married her new husband, Francis Connolly. Mary Ellen continued to live with the newlyweds. In December of 1873, Etta Wheeler, a Methodist missionary of St. Luke's Mission for the Poor, was visiting a tenement building where the Connollys lived. And while Wheeler was there, she was approached by another tenant who lived in this building. And this person wanted to speak to her about a family, the Connollys, that resided in their tenement building. Apparently, the Connollys had a little daughter that was barely seen. But the little girl's screams and the brutalities of Mary Connolly, the adoptive mother, were often heard throughout the building. So in April of 1874, a neighbor, Wheeler, and a community organizer reported the abuse to the New York State Supreme Court. Mary Ellen testified in court about the abuse, neglect, deliberate cruelties, and deprivations inflicted by Mary McCormick Connolly. Her adoptive mother beat her with a rawhide, burned her, struck her with scissors, and forced her to do heavy labor. Mary Ellen was also frequently left alone in a locked, darkened room and deprived of food. She was forced to sleep on the floor and had no warm clothes to wear in cold weather. Remember, this is New York City. We can have temperatures down to 10 or 20 degrees. And in addition, she was forbidden from going outside except at night in her own yard. Ultimately, Mary McCormick Connolly was found guilty of several counts of assault and battery. And as a result, in 1875, New York became the first state to pass laws that protect children, establishing the New York Society for the Prevention and Cruelty of Children, NYSPCC. This law served to help as a standard for other states. As we move on into the 20th century, the concept of using rewards and punishments to influence the behavior of children was more widely accepted. This is called operant conditioning and was proposed by B.F. Skinner, the psychologist. This theory of learning suggests that behaviors are reinforced or rewarded are more likely to be repeated, while behaviors that are punished are less likely to occur. B.F. Skinner was born in 1904 and passed in 1990. He is known for developing the theory of operant conditioning in the 30s, and he coined the term in 1937. Skinner's theory states that behavior and learning are the result of consequences, such as punishment and reward. Reward, which Skinner calls reinforcement, strengthens a response, making it more likely that the desired behavior will be repeated. To sum it up, behavior that is rewarded will likely be repeated, and behavior that is punished will occur less frequently. In post-World War II, authoritarian parenting was the most common. It emphasized discipline, low warmth, and high expectations. This is your classic, traditional, control-based style of parenting. Excuse me. This is the parenting style that I was raised with. So children are seen and not heard and expected to submit to their authority. Typically, there was very little warmth, frequent punishments, and no rights reserved for the ideas or emotions of children. Parents operating with this style are typically strict, cold, dismissive, and non-responsive. These parents employ parent-directed unilateral communication. Basically, their strategy for behavior modification is because I said so. They have high standards, controlling their child's behavior, ruling with an iron fist. In the 1960s and 70s, permissive parenting became common. This emphasizes warmth, lenience, self-expression, and individuality. In the 60s and 70s, we see the pendulum of parenting philosophies swing in the opposite direction toward the permissive parenting style. I have a lot of compassion for permissive parenting because in a lot of ways, I was a permissive parent, and I consciously knew to some degree, but not to the level that I do now, that I became a permissive parent as a compensatory response to the authoritative parenting that I received. So I, as other parents with this parenting style, was highly responsive, nurturing, and affectionate, but I had challenges with inconsistent boundaries. Found it difficult to follow through on discipline. I had a lack of control, not only over my children, but sometimes over myself. And I had a tendency to overindulge people's emotions, even if reality check proved that those emotions were invalid. Naturally, this may seem better than the strict authoritarian iron fist, but many of the children raised by permissive parents often have difficulty with self-regulation, regulating their emotions. They end up having feelings of entitlement and express less empathy towards others. They might perform poorly in school due to lack of discipline, and in some circumstances, they may even be impulsive and aggressive to others. In the 1980s and 1990s, authoritative parenting became more popular, which emphasizes warmth, connection, boundaries, and explanation. Authoritative parenting that in the decades followed permissive parenting, which basically is an anything goes parenting style, the pendulum once again swung to the other side, this time ending up more in the middle of the road, which is less compensatory. When you're at either end of the spectrum, there tends to be a lot of reactive compensatory behaviors. When you reside in the middle, you tend to be more balanced and therefore healthier in your thinking and behaviors. So when this parenting style ended up in the middle of the road position between the two, it actually was a step forward in parenting, because authoritative parenting is different from authoritarian parenting, which is the strict post-World War II style. The key difference is that the authoritative parenting places importance on the parent's connection with the child. So authoritative parenting has parents that are able to set clear rules and boundaries, are responsive to their children's needs. They allow for open communication between themselves and their children. They encourage independence, yet they offer guidance and support. Children in this type of environment are typically happy and content. They have high self-esteem and healthy assertiveness. They show good emotional control, higher levels of empathy. They are resilient to change and typically perform well in school and actively participate in their community. The authoritative parenting style is the gold standard for effective, positive parenting. High warmth, high nurturing, and firm boundaries give you and your child a consistent and reliable challenge to relate to one another. As I became healthier over time by going to therapy and learning, becoming more aware and consciously deciding how I wanted to move forward in my relationship with my children, I actually became a more authoritative parent, became less permissive, more authoritative, and even though my children were older at that time, they were, finishing up high school and entering into college, it actually did have the effect that they talk about here. They were happier and more content. Their self-esteem and assertiveness improved. Their emotional self-control and reactivity reduced. They had higher levels of empathy and were able to be more resilient to life and more flexible as life required it. Today, conscious parenting is becoming more common. Conscious parenting is a child-rearing philosophy that encourages parents to make mindful, emotionally intelligent decisions in raising their children. Based on the bestseller book, The Conscious Parent, Transforming Ourselves, Empowering Our Children by Dr. Shefali Tsabary, which of course this will be in the show notes. Parents are taught to manage their own behavior, thoughts, and feelings first and foremost. Conscious parenting is an evolved form of authoritative parenting. The difference is that a conscious parent is warm and presents firm boundaries while also expressing age-appropriate expectations and demonstrating an increased element of attunement, self-reflection, and parental awareness. Research suggests that these additions support relational security for children. This is how to raise a child with secure attachment. Hooray, we have found the roadmap to success. If you are not from Western culture, I would recommend learning about the history of parenting in your own culture. This will give you a better understanding of your parents and how they were raised, how it affected their emotional development, and how it impacted how they raised you. Personally, learning how my parents were raised helped turn my anger to empathy and compassion. Thank you for joining me. I hope this information is helpful. If you like my content, please choose to follow, subscribe, or provide a rating so I can share this information with more people and you don't miss out on future episodes. I look forward to sharing more in the future. Have a wonderfully peaceful day. Till next time.